Parashat Beshalach. This week we discussed the complaining that's going on in the Parsha. A lot of complaining going on, but really you have to ask, Am Yisrael just saw Kadosh Baruch Hu split the seas, do all these great miracles in this world, and then they go on to complain. Not only did they complain about the water and then they get water, they then again complain about the food and they're demanding food and they're complaining about having a lack of food. So what exactly is going on over there? Why are they complaining so much? What is this all about, this complaining?
And we saw that the word complaining was not what we expected. And if we try to understand the meaning and look at the context, we notice that actually Moshe didn't get angry at them about the fact that they were complaining. And when we dive deeper into that, we saw some amazing teachings that the Torah is teaching us here.
Exactly. Super important teachings for every single person, even today. One of the most important lessons that we keep on learning from so many places, and especially in this week's Parasha, especially in Parashat Manna, that has become this Gula for Parnasa, a Gula for making a living, obviously one of the most important things we have in our lives. We discussed that and also brought some interesting stories. Hope you enjoy it. Take a look. So this week, Parashat Beshalach, one of the most monumental events in our tradition and our history. Kriyat Yam Suf, Kadosh Baruch Hu splits the sea, drowns the Egyptians. Am Yisrael sees the great hand, the great miracles that Kadosh Baruch Hu can perform in this world, and they get to reach this high level of emunah, of faith in Kadosh Baruch Hu, seeing things that even prophets later on, Nevi'im later on, didn't get to see. However, right after Kriyat Yam Suf, as we discussed last year, we find Am Yisrael complaining. And ever since a young age, you really have to ask yourself, what are they complaining? Didn't you just see Kadosh Baruch Hu's great hand? Didn't you just get to this high level of faith? Didn't you just see these incredible miracles happening in front of your eyes? How come you're complaining over here? What's going on? Not only did they complain once about the water, right after they complain again about the man, that they don't have any food and they want man and they want meat, they want bread. How can they be complaining so much after everything they've seen? However, on the other side of it, you have to ask, as we asked last year, what were they thinking to themselves? Going into the desert without any water. Last year we said, how can they go into the desert without any water? We discussed that part. This year, what I want to try to understand is what happens right after it. Okay, they got water, but really, what about food? How can they walk into the desert without having any solution for providing for them food throughout that time in the desert? What were they thinking to themselves? Or in other words, you have to ask, is it so bad that they're complaining? Of course they have to complain because they have no food. So what exactly is going on over here? Is it a bad thing that they're complaining, or are they allowed to complain? Do they have reason to complain? What is going on in this story of the man and the meat that happens after the story of the water?
Well, you pointed to an interesting thing. We assume that it's bad, but is it really bad? We don't see any proof for that. If we actually look through the psukim, although in our mind we see it as, oh, they're complaining, but let's look through the psukim. We see them complain about the water. Moshe doesn't say anything about it. He cares for water. They complain about the food. Hashem doesn't say anything. Moshe doesn't say negative. He doesn't punish them for why are they complaining. That comes later when they fight with Moshe. Now, everything they ask for, all these complaints are responded to with a solution. So maybe we don't actually understand the word complain, or the word here vayilonu. Where does that word come from? Actually the first time it shows up in Torah in the meaning that we're talking about now shows up here when they're complaining to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is when we learn the term that we use as complaining, vayilonu. But that word sounds very similar and actually has the same root as another word which we do know, which means lun. Lamed vav nun means place of rest. A malon, a hotel, a place of rest, is called lalun. Vayalen sham balayla wa bayakov, and different things where we have, a place, lalin, a place to put your head down, a place of rest. That's what lalin means. What does that have to do with complaining? So let's notice another thing. If the word lahalin is to complain, then you complain to someone, right? And that's what we should see here. Them complaining to Moshe, them complaining to Aaron, them complaining to whoever, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But we don't see that. We see that they're complaining on. What does that even mean? How do you complain on? Vayilonu al. But if we think about it, maybe those two words are actually connected. When you're thinking about a place of rest, it's a place where you can turn off, right? Where you can stop being active. You can rest. It's a place to lean on, your support. Who do we complain to? Who do we turn to with a complaint? It's someone that we expect things from. It's someone who we assume they're our support. That's where we can let go. That's where we don't have to do anything because they're caring for us. And when they don't, we turn and we complain. You're complaining on in the sense that you're leaning on. They're complaining complaining on Moshe. Vayalinu al Moshe, because they're leaning on Moshe. Their support. Moshe is the one who takes them out of Mitzrayim. Moshe is who they expect. Okay, he opens the seas. Okay, now he's gonna take care of the water. Well, he didn't, but then he did. Okay, so where's our food? Now Moshe's gonna complain. So they keep coming to Moshe because they're leaning on him. That's their place of rest. That's what they're expecting. And if we look at it that way, we'll notice something entirely different is happening here. There's no problem with them complaining. There's no problem with their tlunot. That's not the problem. And it isn't a problem at all. Moshe is teaching them a lesson, and he repeats it multiple times. He says something very strange. The first thing he says when they complain is, tonight you'll know that God took you out of Egypt. Really? Where were we for the past few parshas? The Makot, they came out of the cross the seas. Tonight you'll know that God took you out of Egypt. How does that have anything to do with them? They want food now. They want something to eat. What does that have to do with taking you out of Egypt? That's the thing. You're still leaning on Moshe. You don't realize that it's God that's taking you out of Egypt. God didn't only punish Egypt and got rid of them and let you out. God is carrying you, as it says in the next parsha, al kanfei nesharim, and the wings of an eagle. He's holding you up. He's the one who's taking you out of Mitzrayim. And as Moshe goes on and says twice, v'nachnu ma, we're nothing. Lo aleinu tlunotechem. If these complaints were a bad thing, what type of thing is that of Moshe to say, don't complain to me, complain to him? It's God's fault. You wanted them to say, stop complaining. God's taking care of you. He's doing everything you need. Now you're going to complain on him? And Moshe says, yeah, complain to him. But that's what Moshe is saying. Complain on him. Lean on him. Lean on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We're nothing. We're just here in the middle doing his job. He's the one who you should be turning to. And if you understand that, we'll realize something even deeper. There's a reason that God didn't give them food and didn't give them water. Hashem is waiting for these tlunot. Look how many times in the Psukim it says from Moshe, from Hashem, that Hashem heard your tlunot. Hashem is listening. We have to remember, as we've mentioned in the past, this is their school of emunah. They don't know when God is involved in the world, when he's not, what he does, what he doesn't. All they know is Egypt and being slaves. So now they know that he punishes the evil, but they don't know what it means to live with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in their life. They don't know yet the terms of hashgacha, of God caring for you every single day. God leaves them without water and without food, so they complain, so they mitlonen, so they'll lean. And then Moshe says, no, you're almost right, but just shift that. I'm nothing. Lean on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Complain. Have your tlunot on him. He's waiting to hear your voice. And I think this leads to a dramatic pasuk which we miss here. We see Moshe and Aaron talking to Am Yisrael. Then we see Moshe talking to Am Yisrael. But then we see an interesting pasuk. Moshe tells Aaron, you go tell them, Kirvu lifnei Hashem. Come close before Hashem. Ki shama Hashem et tlunotechem. Maybe he's telling them, this is why you're lacking food. Hashem wants you to come close, and you will come close by realizing that you're lacking and you need him. And when you turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it'll bring you closer, that need that you have to turn to him and ask for that water and ask for that food. Hashem is listening. Ki shama Hashem et tlunotechem. And based on this, the next pasuk is unbelievable. It says, Aaron speaks to them, and when he speaks to them, they turn to the desert. What does that mean, they turn to the desert? Where were they looking until now? They're in the middle of the desert. They turn to the desert, meaning they turn away from Moshe and Aaron. They turn away. They've been leaning to Moshe and Aaron. Everything is through them. And they turn to the desert, and the desert represents nothingness. They were scared to look at the desert. It was scary. It was open. And they're being taught here, that's fine. That need, that lacking is fine. Turn towards it. And what happens the moment they turn towards it? Vayifnu el hamidbar, vehine kvod Hashem nira ba'anan. And suddenly God appears before them. They're suddenly able to see God because they turn away from Moshe and Aaron and turn towards that desert and are ready to look into that unknown and accept that unknown and realize that that unknown is what's going to lead them to their yearning and their connection with HaKadosh Baruch.
Very good, very good. Yeah, it's important to note, like you were saying, there's a very big difference between the complaining, so-called complaining, the hitlonenut that is going on in this part of the Parsha, to what's going on at the end of the Parsha, right after Parashat Haman, right after the story of the Manna, where we find Am Yisrael not only complaining, but before complaining, vayarev va'am im Moshe, that they went into a fight purposefully in order to fight. And also there, you see it talks in the singular, ani. You see it's not really all of Am Yisrael, but it's a few, it's specifics within Am Yisrael that fight with Moshe, and then they complain. And out of that complaining, out of that fighting, then comes Amalek, really, our biggest enemy. And also there, Moshe really is angry with them. That's what happens over there. But over here, this concept of tluna has merit to it, has reason to it, as you were saying, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to teach Am Yisrael. Moshe and Aaron are teaching Am Yisrael, stop being dependent on us. Stop stop being dependent on humans. And we keep on saying this, that this is one of the main messages that Am Yisrael have to learn throughout the desert. Like you were saying, that in the desert where there's nothing, it's a place of emptiness, it's a place with no resources, and the only place you can look at in the desert is to the sky, is to Shamayim. We keep on saying this message because this is really one of the things that Am Yisrael have to learn throughout the desert, because this is one of the more important lessons we have to learn throughout our entire life, that we keep on learning day after day. The concept, the lesson that we call Hashlech al Hashem Yavcha v'hu yichalkelecha. Put your trust, put your faith, put your dependency on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and He's the one, He will be the one to feed you. He will be the one to give you what you need. And don't be dependent on human beings. And very true what you're saying about this concept of itlonenut, of tluna, being the same root, being the same shoresh as malon, as resting, as sleeping. And we actually find in two places in these psukim what we call a kri v'chtiv, where it's written one word in the Torah, but we read the other one. Now, obviously, this is not a mistake or anything like that. And every kri and chtiv have a very deep reason behind it. And over here, you can really see it in the psukim, where Am Yisrael turns to Moshe for the first time. It says vayalinu, and then it changes to vayalonu, where the word vayalinu sounds like that they are dependent in the concept of resting, of lalin, of malon, of sleeping, and it changes to a word that sounds more like complaining. And then when Moshe turns to Am Yisrael and he says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu heard your complaints and your dependence on Him, don't depend on us. And it changes from a word that sounds like a complaint, tluna, to a word that sounds more like talinu, which is sleeping, which is rest upon, which is depending. And again, having a kri and chtiv like this in these psukim tells us that there's a very, very deep lesson to be taught over here in the psukim themselves, in the story itself. And you know, there's dynamics between depending on Moshe and Aaron, or depending on HaKadosh Baruch Hu and expecting HaKadosh Baruch Hu to give them what they need. Reminds me of a very, very famous story about Zusha. Zusha from Anapoli, Rabbi Elimelech Milijan's brother, that was known for having an incredible bitachon, an incredible faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu and being fully dependent on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The very famous story when a few Hasidim came to their rabbi and asked them, how can they learn more in order to have greater faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu? What should they do? And the rabbi sends them to Zusha. The rabbi sends them to go look at what Zusha does. And so they head to Anapoli, they head to where Zusha lives, and they get to that village over there and they look for Zusha. And knowing Zusha is such a big name, they were expecting to find a person who lives in a nice big home, which is very well respected. And they're looking around and they can't find him, so they ask, where does Zusha live? And they're pointed towards this shack at the end of the village, this little falling apart hut that is barely standing. So they go there, they go in, and they find Zusha's wife and kids all crying and all upset. The kids are hungry, yelling for food. The wife is crying that she has no money. She can't provide for her children. She can't buy clothes. They need shoes. Everything is going so bad for them. And the Hasidim are looking at themselves and they're saying, is this the Zusha we are looking for? Is this the person we're supposed to learn how to have faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu? What's going on over here? So they ask the wife, where is Zusha? Where can we find him? So the wife says, Zusha is probably in the forest doing his Itvodadus by himself over there, davening to Hashem. You can go look for him over there. And she says it in a very disappointed voice, with much despair in her voice about her situation that she's in. So the Hasidim leave their house and they start looking for Zusha in the forest. And then suddenly they start hearing him dancing and singing. And they get closer to him and they see that he's full of happiness and he's davening with all his strength. And looking at him, they're filled with this incredible happiness themselves. And they don't understand what's going on. So they approach him and they say to him, Zusha, what is going on? Your house, your home, your kids, your wife, they're all crying and they're all sad and they're filled with despair about the situation. And yet you are here dancing and jumping and singing and full of happiness. How can you do that when you have no food, when you have no clothes, when you have no money to give to your family? What's going on? How do you do this? So says to them Zusha, of course they're filled with despair. Of course they're sad. You know why they're sad and why they've given up for everything? Because they are dependent on Zusha to bring them money and food and clothes. If I were dependent on Zusha to bring me money and clothes and food, I would also cry. I would also be sad. But I'm not. I'm dependent on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I put my life, I put my faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so I know He's going to give me what I need. But if I would have to be dependent on the Zusha, I would cry too and be in the same situation just as them. And I love this story because this story really brings home this point that it's not about actually getting what you want and having what you want, but it's the mindset of being in understanding that you are dependent on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And you know very famously that Seder Zraim is called Emunot, is called Emunah, because being a farmer is all about having faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because farmers know that they need the rain, and the rain only comes from Shamayim, the rain comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Those farmers have to have full Emunah on HaKadosh Baruch Hu after they put that seed into the ground, waiting for it to blossom, waiting for it to grow, so that they can harvest it many months later. That's what their profession, that's what their business is about. Understanding that in business, that in Parnasa, 1 + 1 doesn't always equals 2. You have to have faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu that He will bring to you what is needed it for you. You have to do your actions, as we've said many, many times. You have to do your ishtadlus, but only after you do your ishtadlus do you open up the place for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to do what has to be done in order for you to get what you need to get. Maybe this is why this parsha has become such a strong tradition to say on Tuesdays of Parashat Beshalach, to say Parashat Manna as a skula for Parnasa, because this is what Parnasa is about. You have to act, you have to work as strong as possible by yourself, do your ishtadlus. However, you have to understand that it's fully dependent on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not on Moshe, not on Aaron, not on anybody out there, but your trust in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You have to turn to the midbar, like you were saying, and then see Kvod Hashem, and then see HaKadosh Baruch Hu doing what He does in this world, providing for us, giving for us what we need. This is what really is going on over here. This is the tlunot that are based on dependency, that are based on who are you leaning on. That is what the story of the man is about, and this is the lesson that Moshe teaches Am Yisrael right over here.
Yes, exactly. And you know, you mentioned the concept of waiting for the rain, and it's interesting, we see this later in the Torah, that when the Torah wants to compare what's amazing about Eretz Yisrael as opposed to Mitzrayim, it's interesting, it doesn't say that in Mitzrayim everything was bad and in Eretz Yisrael everything's good and you'll have fruit and everything's... No, that's not the point. The opposite. In Mitzrayim you had everything. That's the problem. You had the Nile, you didn't wait for the rain, versus Eretz Yisrael where there Einei Hashem Elokecha ba. That's what's also being taught here. It's not only about, you know what, your Parnasa, it's actually from God. It's teaching us more than that. It's saying that the need, that's from God, so you will build that relationship. You want that. You want to be in a position where you're dependent on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, where you wait for the rain, where you have that expectation, where you're lacking the water and you turn to that nothingness, to that desert, to that unknown, and ready to accept that unknown. And when you do that, you make room for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And when you make room for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when you turn to Him, that's when V'hineh kvod Hashem nir'ah be'anad. God is revealed, but listen carefully, in the cloud. And we spoke about this in the past, about Moshe walking into that cloud. On the one hand, God is revealed, but where is God revealed? In that hiddenness that's represented by the cloud. When you're ready to turn to that unknown, when you're ready to turn to that, you won't know exactly, and it's scary. We prefer to, as we see here in the Parsha, they prefer to save some food for later. They know that Hashem said that tomorrow there's going to be more, but who knows? So they save. No. Be ready to leave that food behind. Be ready to turn to that desert. Be ready to not have anything in your fridge tonight and wait again for tomorrow for the new bread to come from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's not a necessity. That's built into the system. That's what builds our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Very good, very good. You know, we can continue talking for a long time about this topic. And also more stories. For example, the Chafetz Chaim, who had his grocery store because he said he wanted to feel that need, to feel that dependency on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and feel that within him. However, we're out of time, so we'll have to end here. We'll just remind the viewers what we discussed the past couple of years. One year we discussed the Parsha that happened just before this, when Am Yisrael requested water. What exactly is going on there? We saw how amazingly the two Parshiot of Miriam singing with the women and the Parsha of Am Yisrael asking for water are actually connected. Miriam singing is not connected to Az Yashir like you would think. However, it's connected to the next Parsha right after it. We saw the amazing Hebrew language of Miriam's name, and the Marim, the water that were bitter. We'll link that video at the end of this one. 2 years ago, we discussed the first pasuk in the Parsha. How can you get through the first pasuk in the Parsha? Because it says Parah sent Am Yisrael. However, we know Parah didn't send them. Parah was forced to send them. It makes more sense to use the words of David HaMelech and Tehillim, Betzet Yisrael Mitzrayim. So what exactly is going on in the beginning of the Parsha? And then in Kriyat Yam Suf, what are those stories about? We'll link that video too. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to share it around. Share it to people that you think they need to hear it. Of course, like this video, comment below. And if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing and help us grow it. Shkoyach Yitzi.
Shkoyach Tuvia, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, and Am Yisrael, we'll talk again next week.